We wanted to get a sense of who was in the room, so I'd love to just quickly poll you guys. Anybody here a classroom teacher? Cool. Thank you. What about an administrator or some type of system leader in a school system? Great, yes, thank you. Do we have any nonprofit or company leaders who are building some type of education offering? Great. What about funders? Anybody from the funding community? Thank you. And parents or caregivers, people who have children in the education system. Amazing, yes. Awesome. We're so happy to have all of you here to have this really critical conversation about the future of reading instruction in this country. We're at this really interesting moment where on the one hand, we have all of this momentum around the science of reading. In a very politically divisive moment, it's one of the few areas where there appears to be the potential for bipartisan agreement. On the other hand, we have historically low reading performance, especially among students that are furthest from opportunity. So it creates this gap of we have the promise of the science of reading, but really to fulfill that, we need to solve a bunch of stuff. We need to think deeply about things like implementation, how to support teachers, the role of technology. There's still a lot of work to do to get to where we're trying to go when it comes to students' reading performance. And there are bright spots. There are areas where research and evidence comes together with solutions that are scalable, that can really have a widespread impact on students in our largest school systems. And so we want to learn from folks like the three panelists that we have up here today who are really thinking deeply about this intersection of impact and growth and what we can learn from that as we move forward and try to really realize the promise of all of this momentum around reading and literacy. So I'm really excited to be joined by our three panelists here. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and we'll get started with some questions. We should have time for some audience Q&A as well, so if you have any questions, be thinking of those. But I'd like to start by just kicking it over to you three to introduce yourselves and your organizations and how you're thinking about reimagining literacy in this country.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Rahul, Kalita. I'm one of the co-founders of Tutored by Teachers. We do virtual high-dosage tutoring in small groups across the country. We're in about 22 states. We started 4 months before COVID. My best friend from 5th grade and I started the company. We played the baritone together, and that's how we first met. And what we do in literacy is we provide K-12 high-dosage tutoring in a number of different ways. We're serving many different student populations. We do bilingual tutoring for migrant students, for newcomers. Across K2, we do a lot of science of reading and foundational literacy skills work. And then in the upper grades, 3 through 12, we're providing scaffolded instruction based on the gaps that kids have, particularly the kids during COVID. There are clearly gaps there, and those existed before COVID, of course, as well. And we drive double-digit gains on nationally normed assessments. And yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
My name is Michelle Brown. I'm the founder and CEO of CommonLit.org. We are a nonprofit focused on adolescent literacy. And we operate a website that crazily, in the past 11 years, I was a teacher turned social entrepreneur, has grown to become the #1 most popular tool among middle school reading teachers today in the US, which is just like really, really wild. So what that scale looks like for our supplemental program is about 7 million children actively use our platform each month and during the school year. But actually, and this is why I'm so excited to be on this panel, for the past 5 years, we've been making a really, really big, strong pivot into basically to reinvent ourselves as a core instructional program, seeing that that is kind of the brightest spot in our theory of change and all of our research and all the research we've seen and the work in Louisiana has sort of confirmed that this is a really cool path for us to take. So with that program is called CommonLit 360. It's completed for middle school and the secondary grades, and then we're also working on it in high school as well. And the scale of that program is about 400,000 students in about 700 schools. So we are doubling down on that right now, and I'm really excited to be here.
I'm Rebecca Kockler. I'm the founder and CEO at Magpie Literacy, and the executive director of an narrative research and development program, Reading Reimagined. It's great to be here. We are building a coherent kindergarten through 8th grade tool to help ensure every single student can access grade level text in a meaningful way. We've spent the last 4 years researching why so many students struggle, especially why so many students tend to struggle after 4th and 5th grade, and what to do about that. And we take our research work and turn it into tools that integrate assessments, instructional supports, and connect to core instruction so that students have a coherent research-based experience as they access grade level text. It's great to be here.
Thank you all three so much for joining us. I really want to start by grounding the conversation in impact. And we talk about reading, we talk a lot about the 3rd and 8th grade assessments, and those are important, but we know they don't tell the whole story. I would love to hear from each of you how you're thinking about measuring your success and your impact on students.
Yeah, I can start. I started this work because of a frustration I had when I was running systems and leading systems work in Louisiana. And we just could not see real traction with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders really up through middle school. The things we were doing in K through 3rd grade were not having the same impact for older students. And I felt like the answers we were getting from both the research community and certainly from the product community were not actually solving real problems for us. And so I wanted to understand why we didn't know more about why students struggle so much after 4th and 5th grade, and why we kind of just say things that are not actually that rooted in research, it turns out. And so we have spent the last 4 years researching that set of questions and really trying to have a clear research base for what is happening. We've found a lot of things I think we don't talk about really at all in our system, certainly don't build products for. I say all of this as context for the question of what do we measure, because I very strongly believe that this sort of general sense we have about how you learn to read, which is you learn to read first, and then around 4th grade you start reading to learn, is an incredibly flawed sense and understanding of how brain and how learning to read works. And it's that statement that has led to the way we measure learning as well. We measure kind of these skills for learning to read up through 3rd and 4th grade. Then we flip and we start measuring these skills around reading to learn, comprehension skills. And that is really problematic. And we tend to put our flag in the ground around 4th grade to say, 4th grade results are the indication if kids can read or not. If they can, great, we have succeeded. Now we're just gonna help do comprehension work over and over. And what our research is finding is that is not at all correct. 8th grade is the flag that students have learned to read successfully. They've made this transition around 4th and 5th grade into more complex word structure. And we actually need to continue measuring a set of skills specific to learning to read through middle school. And so what I really care about is, one, coherent assessments, K-8, that track students. We're not switching between 4 different assessments, kindergarten through 8th grade, and losing clarity on what the heck is happening. And we measure not only comprehension skills, but also core skills learning to read, like morphology, multisyllabic word decoding, fluency through 8th grade coherently from kindergarten all the way up. So I just want to see coherence. I want to see appropriate skills measured at the appropriate age for all kids. I want to see screeners that look really different for every kid through 8th grade.
That was so well said, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, so our North Star metric is reading proficiency. One thing that we have learned in measuring that, which is like obvious, right? But one thing we have learned is that there's like this over-importance placed on a reading comprehension assessment in our market that is like really, really detrimental to all sorts of practice. And if you just take a step back and you look at brain research, and if you look at actually the domain of English language arts, there are 3 domains, and success begets success with all 3. It's reading, but it's also writing, and it's also speaking and listening as well. And that writing and that speaking and listening often is just like, oh yeah, whatever. Like, let's just focus on reading, 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 reading. But that is not how the brain works. That is not how children learn how to read. Like, you have to, that is not how humans process. And later on, I'll talk about like, what we know about adolescents, and particularly the kinds of, classroom environments that are best for them. But our sort of approach, going back to your question, is to elevate measures of our success across those 3 domains, and also to get more nuanced about what are the subcomponents of reading and reading comprehension, of background knowledge, of phonemic awareness, and making sure, just like Rebecca said, that like the learning of that doesn't just suddenly drop off a cliff, or measurement of it doesn't just drop off a cliff because a child like had a birthday party. You know what I mean? Like that, it makes no sense. So that's sort of what we're trying to do, and trying to shift sort of the whole market, with the knowledge and then the tools, and then equip schools with the implementation support to change their mindsets as well.
So when we talk to district and charter folks, the first slide you see, and the first in the upper left-hand corner, it says outcomes focused. And for us, our North Star is the outcomes. And so how do we do that? It's based on what the particular district or charter is looking for, whether it's state test prep or improvements in dibbles and things like that. And so some of the anecdotes that I can talk about, we had a school in Charlotte-Mecklenburg that saw the largest multi-MLL growth in the state, and they credit us with being part of the solution to why they were able to drive those outcomes. Or in New Jersey at Foundation Academy in Trenton, they were in the top 1% of growth in the state, and they credit us with being one of those drivers. And so when you think about what we're providing expanded capacity in the classroom. So students are getting extra instruction hours. So it's a little bit different from a tool or software. But what you're really looking for there is you're looking to translate that into extra months of learning. So we typically see like 3 to 6 months of extra learning due to our programs. And sometimes we've, in a migrant student program, we saw 1.3 years of extra instruction. For the folks in here who are working on solutions, I would highly recommend that you really think about measurement and try to be a deep partner with your districts or your charters to get access to that data. And that's like the key to efficacy and the key to being sustainable too.
And this concept of coherence has come up a few times, and NewSchools is a funder of innovative ideas. You all are clearly thinking about how to do things in new ways, and innovation is important, and we know that that has to be balanced with consideration of what else is going on in the school systems and the classrooms that you're serving. How do you think about instructional coherence?
I love this question. Yeah, if you just like step back, like what is coherence and what is the experience of a child in like 60% of like, just like a standard school in the US today, like in the majority of public schools. It is an incredibly disorienting and incoherent experience for a child when it comes to their literacy development. Their teachers are using, I think Rebecca cited her organization, like 15 different tools at any given point, 4 to 5 in 1 week. If you are a child, you're going from one classroom to a next, just without similar vocabulary. You're going from one, unit of instruction to the next unit of instruction that has like no connection. So imagine like on Monday you're reading about ant colonies, and on Tuesday you're reading about the Supreme Court, and on Wednesday you're reading about something, the Statue of Liberty. Like, that is the experience for a child. It is very, very hard to develop vocabulary, to develop a sense of deep expertise, to have a coherent discussion with your peers in this like completely incoherent, confusing environment. What's more, at a macro and systems level, right? So just like the experience of a child going from grade to grade, there's a lot of research that shows that rigor actually dips in middle school grades when it's supposed to go up. And like, because teachers are planning in silos for the most part, 60% of schools, secondary schools in the US, do not have an HQIM, a high quality curriculum or guaranteed viable curriculum. That means teachers are planning in their little egg crates and not communicating or collaborating. Without a shared curriculum, that means you can't guarantee that 7th grade is going to build on the skills of 6th grade, or that 8th grade will be harder than 7th grade. And that is a disaster. So the case for coherence and the case for high quality curriculum is essentially that is foundational. Like, without having those tracks of a guaranteed viable shared curriculum for teachers where they don't have to spend every day scrambling and planning with all of the things that they have to do, like, y'all, planning a coherent instructional program and like writing a curriculum as an individual teacher is so hard. You're weaving in all of these standards together. It's like impossibly difficult. We have, 6 PhDs working on it over like a 5-year horizon and still finding it really, really, really challenging. So the idea that an individual teacher in a school could do that is just, just completely nuts. So to us, that is sort of like the promise and the importance of high quality instructional materials and coherence. And then once you have that installed, the interventions can really flow from that. And also the assessments and the measurement can just like fit in. It's kind of like, for us, I think, the unlock.
Yeah, I think this question of where does innovation happen in coherence is a really interesting one for all of us right now in particular. And I would argue that the ed tech space in reading in particular is destroying coherence for the most part, when in fact, education technology could actually be enabling coherence even more and making people's job even better, but it doesn't. And the question is, why doesn't it when it could? What would it look like for technology to actually support coherence from a student perspective and a kid perspective and a teacher perspective, sorry. You're right. I think the average teacher in Louisiana was using about 15 products in a reading classroom. That was a clean, quote unquote, classroom across assessments, screeners, supplementals, intervention, core instruction, and other things. 15 products in one reading classroom. I think I just read something, 45 products is the average number of products a student experiences overall in a week at school, right? That's not just reading, that's in other areas. That is not how you learn, actually. And most importantly in reading, that is definitely not how you learn to read. And so I think there are 2 major places we can think about innovation and coherence. First is on the research side. When you look at a lot of tools that have come up, a lot of them come from isolated research. We have funded isolated research in reading. You go deep in, just these foundational decoding sequences for younger kids. You go deep in vocabulary. You have an expert in fluency. And that's fine. That makes sense. But that has translated to a screener that focuses on fluency and a tool that focuses on checking on vocabulary. And there's that sort of isolated research turns right into product innovation. That is a dysfunctional sort of step in the process. There's an interim step that needs to connect research in a more coherent way in thinking about the totality of the framework for learning to read and how it actually works and integrate those pieces. That's a lot of what we've tried to do in our AirDiff program is fund lots of isolated research, but bring it together in a coherent instructional model to connect the dots before we do product building. That is a major place for innovation, and innovation could be so powerful. But right now we put all those tools out and we expect the teacher to do that, which is just crazy. And again, we spend so much time thinking about how to do it. The fact that teachers do it, is just, they don't, which is what happens for kids. The second place for innovation is looking along that line of coherence. There's so much complexity in learning to read. There are so many places where different kids with different strengths and different needs struggle. We should be obsessed about researching that and understanding it, and then innovating around that spot. How do you get this group of kids into this coherent learning experience? How do you get them to unlock text in the right way? The innovation should focus there. We don't think about innovation from a student. We think about innovation from, I'm going to build a cool fluency app. I'm going to build a really cool, app where it will listen to a kid. That is not a student problem around being able to access text. It might be if it's focused in the way and it gets students back into meaningful text, which is the whole point of reading. But it is not how we have oriented in our innovation funding, and I don't always think in our marketplace, and we really have to hold, I think, ed tech much more responsible, and the research community much more responsible for coherence and integration in a way where right now it basically sits on the back of teachers.
For us, it's incredibly important that we're customizable to the particular district or school's needs. And so to the point on HQIM, in a 30-to-1 environment, as a teacher, you're not able to serve every student, right? And so when you bring us into that classroom, you're able to differentiate instruction. And so perhaps for the bubble kids, they're getting a double dose of what's happening in the classroom. You give us your scope and sequence, and we can do the rest there. But then for kids who need intervention, you might have a paraprofessional in the classroom, or you might not. And that's where having those extra what we call teacher tutors in the classroom virtually, that's where students are able to have their needs met because we're looking at student data to smart group those kids and identify the skills and the standards that they need extra help with.
Rebecca, I want to follow up on some of what you were sharing around the deep R&D that you did through the iterative program, Reading Reimagined, and you had this period of intense R&D before going to the market with Magpie. Can you share a little bit more about how that research and development set you up for the solution that you're now bringing into the market?
Yeah, for sure. I think I knew that the thing I was obsessed with was why do so many kids struggle after fourth grade, right? We're not seeing any progress really as a country with students after fourth grade. And in fact, we see this, what often looks like a regression. Kids seem to do worse. Kids who looked like they could read show up to fifth grade and no longer show that they can read. That does not logically make sense. What is happening? I'm not convinced it's just a vocabulary issue, although vocabulary is very important. But I don't think it's just a vocabulary issue. So we knew that was kind of the issue we wanted to really go after. And you could just say, I'm going to go build a product to help solve that problem. But honestly, when we started doing it, we were like, what would we build? We actually don't know why. We spent 6 months just reading research, literally, just reading every piece of research we could read about adolescent readers. There is not a clear research base for why that is happening. There's just not. It doesn't exist. There's bits and little pieces that suggest fluency definitely seems to be playing an issue here. Okay, well, what is fluency? Okay, well, it looks like there's a little piece here on morphology. Something happening in morphology when word structure changes. That's interesting. What else is happening? There's a lot more to language. So if we were just going to go and build something for the product, we would have built a fluency app, or we would have built a morphology app. Neither of those things will teach a student to read, and neither of those things in and of themselves will help students access complex text. And we did not want to do that. We did not want to go out and contribute to not knowing really from a true research base, what would we build that would truly allow every kid to access a book in a meaningful way? And do we have confidence, not perfect confidence, but some confidence that the thing we're going to build will really do something different. And it won't just show growth in that one area, but it will actually show growth in transfer as students transfer from book to book to book. That was the problem we wanted to solve. And so it just we had to do research. Honestly, if we were going to build a tool that was really going to solve the problem, there wasn't a research base to pull from, and so we had no choice but to do meaningful research first to better understand what was happening for students before we started to build. And we are fundamentally building a completely different tool than a fluency app or a morphology app today. Because of that research, we understand so much more about what happens as kids transfer to more complex words and multisyllabic words, and feel much more clear on the sort of integration of skills and how they come together in the context of grade level text, essentially. So it was, for us, essential to actually solve the problem we were most interested in solving at the student level.
Great. Michelle, I want to pick up on this thread around adolescent literacy. And, there's been so much attention paid to early reading, and that's obviously very important. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on what makes for effective literacy instruction in middle school and high school and what's needed there.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So, when CommonLit sort of came of age, it was a big in the reading by grade 3 sort of moment in reading, and I sort of had a similar kind of question that Rebecca had, and I've been dedicating my whole career to it, which is so then why are we seeing so many gaps and gaps widening at middle school, and what can we actually do in those to not give up on students for the rest of the course of their many years. They're getting their 10,000 hours and going to school. It's on us to make that up for them and to graduate skills with what is arguably the most basic thing that a school needs to do, which is teach a child to read and write. But that's just not happening. And so I approached this kind of question with a similar mind to Rebecca because, and went to school for it because it's just not, it's really complicated. Our brains are really, really complicated. And sort of where we landed is looking at the brain research of children from ages 10 to 17 and what we know from brain science about what areas of the brain are developing at those ages. It turns out, and if you've been a middle school teacher, or if you have middle school children, you probably know teenagers are social creatures. They're super oriented around their peers. They're so obsessed with their peers, and that's actually going on in their brains. That is the area of the brain at those ages that is developing the most. And so where we landed is trying to develop a curriculum and a program that is particularly designed for helping students build that social capital in the classroom, for helping language and making meaning of text be something that a classroom does together. That's a culture building exercise. Our program is very, very collaborative. Students work a lot in groups. They also do lots of independent work. They take on leadership roles. They build agency. And also another really key piece of the puzzle is the speaking and listening component. So you want to hear some sad statistics we found? So the average middle school student in the U.S., guess how many minutes of speaking they actually do during the school day about an academic subject? It's less than 3 minutes. Less than 3 during the entire school day. Guess how many minutes of sustained reading they actually do, on average, standard practice in the U.S. from 8 a.m. when they get there to 3 o'clock when they leave on the bus. It's 8 minutes of sustained practice with reading. So the idea that we're even giving children the chance to practice speaking or to practice writing, middle schoolers aren't even writing enough of what IES recommends for a kindergarten student. They're not getting the practice. And so that's sort of what led us to, okay, well, if we're not even giving them the opportunity to do the practice, of course, we're seeing these giant declines. What is happening in the classroom that, is, not enabling a teacher to provide these instructional experiences for kids. And that's how we landed back on our theory of action and our theory of change about it starts with the curriculum, and it starts with the HQIM, because in our view, that defines what teachers and students do every day together.
Rahul, you're building a solution for the students who need the most support. How do you make sure that your interventions complement and build on what's going on in core instruction and help teachers and students show up stronger in the general education classroom?
So going off the research, UFly is very popular these days, and so that's part of what we build into our programs. And what I'll say is the way we approach each of our programs in a school is we kind of view it as its own research and development. And so semester over semester and essentially week over week, we are thinking about how do we make things better. And we capture a ton of data in what we do. We do a pre, a mid, a post. And now we now have exit tickets implemented into our programs. And so we're getting real-time feedback from the kids and from the teacher tutor, and that's been really helpful in terms of evolving the programs. What I'll say on how we are integrating into the classroom, I touched on it earlier, just that we're leveraging HQIM and scope and sequence for particular groups of kids, usually those kids on the bubble or above. And then for the bottom quartile or up to the 40th percentile, what we're providing is scaffolded support, and we're leveraging the existing data that the school has to basically support on that unfinished learning that the kids have.
That's awesome. So I'm hearing a lot of focus on aligning the solution design with the research, on instructional coherence, on measuring what matters, and so there's a lot of work there. And in order to have impact, the research and evidence side is not enough. We also have to get these solutions into school systems and reaching thousands and millions of students and having an impact there. So I want to shift gears a little bit and think about sustainable growth together. And as we know, as we heard this morning, there's so many shifts going on right now around policy and the funding landscape. What are you hearing from educators and school systems? What types of solutions are they asking for and willing to pay for in this moment?
Some of you in the room can probably commiserate with me on this. A year ago, times were good, and we were serving about 105 kids per school, and now we're probably somewhere around 50 kids per school. Certainly the need is there. It's just that the schools are having to get more targeted and strategic about who they're serving. And so the way I think about post-ESSER life and the challenges that we're facing in an environment where folks can't really make decisions because there's so much uncertainty, is that there are gives and takes, and the need is there. The need has always been there, and it's kind of a matter of how do you prioritize. And so to your point on using 45 tools, do you need 45 tools? Maybe, maybe not. And what we're seeing is that if you're able to prove efficacy of what you're doing, districts will allocate budget for you. And so that is I think that's one of the most important things we've done, is captured a ton of data to prove that we work, because districts are looking for proven solutions, and so you just have to show them that it's working.
So, yeah, let's be real here. We're at a point where more students at 8th grade are reading below basic than they have in the past decade. And at that same time, this is a moment, so I've been, running and leading CommonLit as founder CEO for 11 years, and have raised about $50 million for the nonprofit over that horizon. And today, I can say that I can count on one hand the number of philanthropies that specifically focus on literacy. And it is dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. So, and we have seen this coming for a long, long time. It's been very disorienting to sort of see the trend. But so our focus has been on our own self-sustainability. So that's sort of our approach right now. So we have, about 5 years ago, adopted, really like pushed and fueled our go-to-market. And we're now 64% earned revenue sustaining as a nonprofit, and actually like on a path to be 100% self-sustaining, hopefully, in the next 3 years. The scaling challenges, though, are real, and particularly for our theory of change, because we're trying to get schools to adopt a core curriculum, and particularly we're trying to get schools that have never had a core curriculum before, which is over half of secondary schools in the US that don't have an HQIM, to adopt it and manage the change for the first time ever, with leaders that have not managed change like that at scale in their districts ever before. So we're really sort of at this point where we're understanding that materials alone aren't enough, and our solution where, okay, we just if we give you access to this, you sign the purchase order, and then like, here it is, and then the magic happens. It ain't true. It's not going to happen. So our support and our solution has to now has to include the curriculum-based professional learning for teachers, and also the assessments that are coherent with the curriculum as well, and also the implementation support for leaders to help them manage the change, and the mindsets shifts that we have to get teachers to do to actually take on the huge undertaking of what it will actually take to turn around student outcomes in a big system. So it's not easy, but that at least we can see the path, and we have confidence in the solution.
Two things that I think would help scale better things for students. One is to this marketplace that I think is kind of a mess. We need someone bringing transparency to efficacy studies. So this is a little bit wonky, but necessary. So there are lots of bad products that show efficacy. That's really easy to do in an outrageously low bar in a country where we are worse at teaching children to read today than we were 20 years ago, and in a country where only 30% of kids read on level. All you have to do is be slightly better than that, and you will show efficacy growth. It's not that hard, actually. Again, wildly low bar. And so what is real efficacy in our country, and what should we demand from products? And how do you compare apples to apples? The quality of the efficacy study matters a lot. Are they showing you subgroup results? Are they showing you results over time? Really complex things that most companies do not show you. You have to dig and find it, and sometimes even then it's very difficult to find. We need somebody in the market helping to bring transparency to efficacy. People will pay money for efficacy, and those products will scale, but it's very hard to differentiate yourself because it's hard to understand why this regression analysis is not that rigorous and this regression analysis is very rigorous. What does that even mean? So it's that kind of stuff the system in general needs a lot more help with making sense of. And the What Works Clearinghouse and others, I would argue, are not very good bars of that and measures for that in the system. So that's one set of things that I actually think would help scale better tools. It would, in a time where budgets are low, it would help direct people to funding and how to spend their money, and it would help clean up the system of the bloat that exists with all of these products. The second thing we think a lot about is what's the best role of the teacher. Scale is hard because the teacher job is so hard. You need so many hours of training to do so many different things. And a lot of our research is showing complex things, like your linguistic pattern has a lot to do with how you should learn to decode. Well, that's really hard to differentiate for, or even know, or like, what are the different linguistic patterns in my own classroom? That's complex stuff. Probably not best for a teacher. Really good for technology to figure out how to create different decoding progressions for kids based on their linguistic patterns, right? What's really great for teachers? Facilitating meaningful social class-based conversations about meaningful text. That is an awesome job for a teacher. It's really hard to do. To do that and to differentiate perfectly to help every kid access it and do all of the vocabulary practice, again, linguistic pattern decoding into text, really hard. Maybe a better role for technology. And so being more thoughtful about where technology can free up a teacher to focus on what they're best, to have less you need to train a teacher on to actually succeed and feel great at their job is a really important thing for us to think about. And again, connecting to coherence, connecting to this core of helping kids access meaningful text. The last thing I'll say about this is when you look at an efficacy study to connect the two, you should demand low effort from educational technology. And if those efficacy studies came at a baseline requirement of 10 hours of teacher training, that's not very helpful to you. Because who has 10 hours to train a teacher just on this one tool that just does this one thing, and then you have 40 more hours to train on the comprehension? We deliberately build our tool and do efficacy studies where we only train a teacher for 1 hour. And we do all of our efficacy studies with 1 hour of teacher training. It forces us to build a very different way. We have to build for quality out of the gate, knowing a teacher is not going to get 10 hours to use our product, because ideally most of that teacher training is going to Michelle's product around reading comprehension in the classroom. And so again, how efficacy studies connect to the requirements from your teacher matters a lot in scale, because it's where you're going to put your time and money around training, implementation efforts, a tool that doesn't really work because you couldn't get that much training anyway. So I think focusing for me on those two things helps us understand how to direct dollars, clean up the system, focus teacher training on the things that a teacher is really best positioned to do, and I think hopefully overall save money, but still see results.
Great. I'm hearing there's a lot of interdependence between the sustainable growth side and the research and evidence side. I want to close out with one final question, and we should have time for a few audience questions as well. But as leaders, we're in a space of constrained resources, of uncertainty, and there's trade-offs that we're all balancing. So when you think about these two areas of research and evidence and growth and financial success, how do you think about balancing across those and managing the trade-offs as you're leading your organizations in this moment?
This is so hard. So I can tell you, like, from someone who's tried to lead an organization through this transition of being 100% reliant on philanthropy to being self-sustaining, it does feel, now we're at 64% earned revenue sustaining. It does feel like this self-sustaining and impact is like sometimes at odds. And sometimes it's been probably like the crux of my leadership to crack the code, and like looking out in a market where there aren't a lot of examples of business models that are like ours, that really balance those two things well. And we as a team have run into so many moments where if we just borrow, all of the practices of like big tech or like SaaS or like a general SaaS company, there's a lot of good stuff there, but it's also not 100% a fit for a nonprofit model, and especially one that needs to focus on the interests of children and teachers and schools and communities. And so this has been like probably the trickiest nut we've had to crack, and sort of like the area of the most innovation, not just in like the product itself, but in like our business model, our rituals, our operating model, and we've sort of had to like create a lot of structures, just kind of like that feels like from scratch. I'd say one area we've innovated here that has helped us with our scale is in like our approach to customer service, or essentially like So we have a SaaS business model, software as a service, which mostly like compounds. It's really innovative and has made a lot of billion-dollar companies, but it compounds mostly due to like recurring revenues from renewals. And in most SaaS businesses, that customer success team sort of just like checks in, you know, like, how are you doing? Da da da. Okay. And then they sort of say, you know, okay. And they're just focused on like retention, conversion, and efficiency of that team. We decided, okay, retention and conversion, that's fine. That will get us the money that we need. But we know that just because somebody renews for a contract does not mean that school is going to leverage the outcomes. It does not mean the children in that school are actually going to learn how to read and write. And so we have innovated there, and it's been really cool. 100% of our customer service reps are former classroom teachers or leaders, and we've turned them into almost like customer success 2.0, where they're actually providing, in addition to that, the implementation support to help schools actually install the enabling conditions that they need for our program to be a success. So like doing audits, like do you have shared planning time and things like that that we know are critical for our program.
Yeah, it's really hard to certainly balance those things. I think one small thing for the funders in the room, we got really lucky and we got 2 big bet grants out of the gate. And I just cannot overemphasize the power of big bet grants in nonprofit success in this space. The market is not built to, in my opinion, to build quality for kids. And the market mostly does not prioritize efficacy. They prioritize minimum level of efficacy for sales and to meet ESSA tiers and whatnot, and that's about it, just straight up. And this is why I started this, because I was frustrated with the market in Louisiana and couldn't find enough products that were actually going to serve kids in the way it needed to. And nonprofits, I would argue, have some of the best tools out there from an efficacy perspective, but it's very hard to get started when you get small grant opportunities out of the gate, and you can't do coherence, honestly. You just can't. And so part of why we have been able to do some of what we've been able to do is because of 2 really generous big bet grants at the beginning. And it just is so powerful in changing our space and what is powerful in building tools for kids that really focus on outcomes and efficacy. So that's just a small sort of maybe big, comment that I think we have to understand, like, how do we fund this kind of work in a way that can really focus on coherence, focus on the integration of the actual pedagogy we're talking about, and actually build in a way that can really deliver on results for students. We are seeing results out of the gate that are bigger than most other products out there. And again, I would argue that's because we had a runway, we had time to focus on it, we didn't need to get revenue out of the gate, and we could focus on the research in a way that is so special and almost impossible. Many people who work for me worked for for-profit education companies before, and will say it is very special and completely rare to focus on efficacy in the way that we've been able to. So I just want to double down on how hard it can be. Now, revenue will matter for us. We hope to be revenue sustaining, in about 5 to 6 years. It's amazing that you're at 64%, which is really great, but our prices are dramatically lower as a result of not having to pay anyone back for anything, and also think there's still a path for revenue that allows for a sustainable company model as well while we focus on efficacy. So I think the first 3 years are really critical in where that money comes from, the size of that money, for long-term ability to really put efficacy at the forefront. Again, that's all kind of like wonky stuff, but really matters when we're talking about this balance, and it's not just easy. You cannot truly just have revenue out of the gate and efficacy out of the gate. You just can't. And so you got to pick. And there's not a lot of levers that truly allow you to pick efficacy out of the gate above revenue and scale.
What you both said really resonates with me and our general approach. A couple things I'll just add. You think about conditions for success in a classroom, and to your point on like the SaaS model, what you end up seeing is a lot of SaaS ends up getting unused, right? And so if we're in a classroom and our attendance rates are, and it's during the school day and our attendance rates are, 20, 40% or something like that, we will reach out and we will find out, hey, what's going on in that classroom? And we're really dogged in our approach on how do we maximize your attendance? Because it's people's tax dollars that are being invested in these kids, right? And so we have an approach on implementation that if the kids are in the sessions, you're going to see the outcomes, and so we're going to do our best to get that attendance up. The other thing I'll say is that we're pretty vulnerable in our approach. Like we're doing a MLL program in the Northeast right now, and the attendance is really bad. It's like less than 20%. And so we asked the school, can we pause the program and reallocate the funding for the coming school year where we have more planning time and more comms time, thinking about those conditions for success, like how do we make sure that those investments are really working? And then the last piece I'll just say is, especially when we're talking about sustainability and just the district dollars being fewer, we really take an approach where you take a small bet with us. Like we'll work with 10 or 20 kids. You're going to see the results, and then you're going to start thinking about expanding and how do we get these services to more kids. And so I think that's also important in terms of meeting the schools and the kids where they are with their budgets.
Thanks. I think we have time for about 2 questions. We don't have very much time, so please keep your question brief.
I have a teacher voice. I can probably just scream. Rebecca, you talked about accountability and also validation of particularly supplemental products, technology, but also even core at this point. With the recent fair or unfair criticism of ed reports, there's a counter sort of set of Reading League now trying to make their own validations and accountability. How do you think about what it is that we need and how we have some kind of collective entity that we have enough faith in that could do not just core, but also supplemental? All the tech, all the others, because otherwise it is kind of the Wild West market, and I think it's incredibly difficult for school districts to discern quality from lack of quality. And so it feels like we need kind of an ed reports type, whether it's them or not, but also to extend into the supplemental and the tech.
It's really hard to do supplemental because everyone claims to do a different thing. And so they're going to say, well, I just do fluency, so you can't hold me accountable to vocabulary, or I just do this. And you can't really expect to see results just for this thing because I just do decoding. So like, you got to really just look at decoding results. So I think it's hard, and this is the difference of inputs and outputs too. So ed reports and all of these other rubrics are super important. They've been very meaningful to the market. They focus on the inputs of those systems and those tools. Supplementals should have a much higher bar for the outputs, in my opinion, because they should demand less teacher time and training as a part of fidelity of implementation, which is why people claim you can't do results, which again, I would roll my eyes at. Like if you can't train teachers at scale, then your product isn't good, period. So, let's not just keep saying it's all a fidelity problem. Like maybe your tool needs some help here if you're a supplemental in particular, because that time should, again, be going to core. So I think, and then there's the question of efficacy quality. So what is the measure? Is a measure on just fluency or decoding appropriate for a 6th grader? I'd argue no, but we have some debates to have around that. And then we have to say, what is the study quality? What kind of regression are we doing? What kind of student, correlations are we looking at? So is it random or not? But I think there's a body of folks who could do that very well. And at the very least, even if they didn't demand it, at least just be transparent about it. Here's the quality of study. It's on one measure. Do you care about that as a system or not? Or do you care about the fact that this had an impact on an integrated measure? Do you care about the most rigorous form of regression analysis happening and it was randomized or not? there's just transparency to compare apples to apples would be such a contribution to the field that I think is a much more powerful tool for supplementals than the input side, because you're just going to argue, I think, with developers until the end of time about whether or not they can be evaluated on that inputs sort of rubric.
Hello, Alvin Irby from Barbershop Books. My question is about the role of social and emotional elements of reading, such as reading identity, confidence, self-efficacy, agency, how you see those things. I see them as driving out of school reading and reading for fun, which isn't happening. And so I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about how those things integrate into your work.
Yeah, I mean, those are inextricably linked to success on, reading, writing, ELA skills, in my view. I mean, our sort of even like mission statement includes the words motivation and curiosity. So that's like how important those factors are to us, and like ultimately like what we're driving for here. But like for us, we think about it as like, success begets success when you can read, write, and think, and then you can develop like a sense of expertise that increases your social capital, which will drive your motivation, which will help you work in a collaborative classroom environment, which will help prepare you for life and to be in a community and to be in a democracy. And so for us, it's sort of like the ultimate North Star that is just like, incredibly important and sort of the whole point.
One thing I would say is a lot of our research that we're doing is showing for struggling readers, when the older they get, the more success you have when you integrate, whether even in the most basic form of decoding, but decoding, fluency, spelling, vocabulary in the context of grade level text. And you actually build the skill better. So it's actually just better for the skill building that you are doing. That almost never happens, right? We pull kids out, we do intervention in a separate spot, we do isolated intervention. Long-term efficacy on isolated intervention is very, very low. They're very time-consuming programs that don't tend to lead to transfer back into grade level text at any point in a student's life, actually. And so I say that because I think it's connected to motivation too. I think kids feel that. They want to show up and read with their peers. They want to read books that are appropriate to their brain and appropriate to their curiosities. And it turns out it also helps them build that decoding skill better when they do it in the context of rich and meaningful grade level text. And so one of the ways we think about it, and we have funded all of our research, has focused on how do we do all of these strategies and skills in the context of appropriate, rigorous grade level text, even if a student is an early decoder. And all of the strategies that we're publishing on and everything have been done in that context. We see greater skill development, we see greater transfer over time, and we see much more interest and curiosity and confidence building with kids. So there's just actual, like, the work we do with students, like, of the skill building connects to so much of this too. And I think so many of our strategies don't honor the actual way you build the skill and the experience that has for a kid and what they're trying to do, which is just fit in and talk about the things that they're interested in and that their peers are talking about.
Thanks. We're going to have to leave it there. We covered a lot of ground in an hour. There's always more to talk about on this topic. Thank you so much for being here. Please help me thank our panelists.